Rome, July 10th, 1973, 3 o'clock in the morning. The heat in the Piazza Farnese is not merely a temperature. It is a physical weight, pressing down on the cobbles with the humidity of a swamp. This is the height of the Anni di Piombo, the years of lead. Italy is a fractured state, hemorrhaging from political terrorism, inflation, and a burgeoning industry that the locals call l'anonima sequestri, the kidnapping syndicate. In this chaotic ecosystem, human flesh has a market price, indexed by the perceived net worth of the victim's surname. John Paul Getty III, 16 years old, walks alone. He is not a tycoon. He is a golden hippie, a malnourished artist selling jewelry on the Spanish steps, wearing oversized sweaters, and living on the fringes of the Roman counterculture. He possesses nothing but a genetic lottery ticket. His last name, the Fiat 124 that pulls up beside him, does not screech. It maneuvers with predatory efficiency. There is no cinematic struggle. The mechanism of abduction is crude and industrial. A burlap sack smelling of grain and gasoline is forced over his head. He is thrown into the back seat, folded like luggage. As the car accelerates out of the piazza, the silence returns instantly. The heir to the greatest fortune in modern history has just been delisted from the free world. Cut to Sutton Place, Surrey, England. A 16th century Tudor manor comprising 72 rooms, surrounded by a moat and patrolled by Alsatian dogs trained to attack on command. Inside, the air is conditioned to a museum-grade chill. J. Paul Getty, 80 years old, sits behind a desk that once belonged to a British monarch. When the phone rings, he does not flinch. The news is delivered. His grandson is gone. The ransom demand arrives shortly after, typed on an Olivetti typewriter with uneven keys. $17 million. Adjusted for the inflation of 2026, this demand equates to approximately $115 million. To a normal grandfather, this is a tragedy. To J. Paul Getty, it is an unsolicited business proposal with poor fundamentals. He approaches the crisis not with adrenaline, but with the forensic accounting of a hostile takeover defense. He reviews his ledger. He consults his tax attorneys regarding the deductibility of ransom payments under United States and United Kingdom tax codes. He finds the return on investment to be non-existent. The world press descends upon the manor gates, a swarm of flashbulbs and microphones demanding a reaction from the richest man on earth. They expect a plea for mercy. They expect a checkbook. Instead, Getty emerges, his face a mask of limestone, and delivers a statement that strips the situation of all sentimentality, reducing his own bloodline to a multiplication table. He stares into the lens, his voice devoid of tremor. "I have 14 other grandchildren," he says. "If I pay 1 penny now, I'll have 14 kidnapped grandchildren." It was a calculation of cold, utilitarian logic. In his mind, he was protecting the capital of the dynasty from future liabilities. He believed he could negotiate with the Ndrangheta crime syndicate the same way he negotiated drilling rights in the neutral zone. He was treating the life of a teenager as a distressed asset that could be waited out until the price dropped. He was about to discover that while oil can be stored indefinitely, human biology has an expiration date. Rewind to 1914, the red beds of Oklahoma. The landscape is a scarring vision of early industrial capitalism. Derricks rising like wooden skeletons against a sky choked with coal smoke and pulverized rock. The air tastes of sulfur and raw possibility. Here, a 22-year-old J. Paul Getty drives a battered Ford Model T through the mud of Haskell County. He is not yet the ossified miser of Sutton Place. He is young, sharp, and begrimed with the grease of the field. His father, George Franklin Getty, is the architect of this excursion. George is a Minneapolis lawyer turned wildcatter, a man of rigid Christian Science faith who views alcohol, tobacco, and leisure as moral failings. He has sent Paul to the oil fields not merely to work, but to break his spirit, to cure him of the infectiously bohemian affectations he acquired at Oxford. But George has miscalculated. Paul is not allergic to the work. He is addicted to the gamble. The science of oil exploration in 1914 is a primitive art relying on surface geology to predict subterranean oceans. Paul possesses a savant-like ability to read the anticlines, the arch-like folds in the Earth's crust where oil is trapped. He attends a lease auction for a parcel of land known as the Nancy Taylor allotment. It is a patch of dirt dismissed by the veterans of Standard Oil and Royal Dutch Shell. The majors see dust. Paul sees structure. He bids $500, roughly $15,000 in 2026 currency. It is a trivial sum for a lease that the establishment deems worthless. The drilling begins using cable tool technology, a violent and slow process where a heavy chisel bit is repeatedly dropped into the earth, pulverizing the rock foot by agonizing foot. For weeks there is only noise and expense. Then the bit breaches the Bartlesville Sand Formation. The pressure release is immediate. Crude oil erupts, coating the derrick and the men in black gold. The Nancy Taylor well produces 700 barrels a day. Within 2 years, the young playboy has transmuted his $500 bet into a fortune worth $30 million in 2026 terms. Success, however, does not bring father and son closer. It accelerates their estrangement. Paul takes his new wealth and retreats to Los Angeles, embracing the roaring 20s with an appetite that horrifies his father. He collects wives and Cadillacs with equal speed. He funds his lifestyle through the minim division of his royalties, a financial structure that ensures cash flow while he engages in affairs that make the tabloids. George Getty watches from a distance, his diary entries recording a deepening despair over his son's moral looseness. The inevitable crash of this relationship arrives in death. When George Getty dies of a stroke in 1930, the reading of the will is the final judgment. The estate is valued at $10 million, an immense fortune at the onset of the Great Depression. Paul expects to inherit the reins of the empire he helped build. Instead, the will is a legal eviction. George leaves the controlling interest and the bulk of the capital to his wife Sarah. Paul is bequeathed a mere $500,000, a fraction of the total. It was a humiliation designed to extend beyond the grave. George had concluded that his son was a brilliant businessman, but a bankrupt human being. Paul walked away from the probate court with a check and a laceration on his psyche that would never heal. He had proven he could extract oil from stone, but he had failed to extract approval from the only man whose opinion mattered. He resolved then that if he could not be the favorite son, he would become the richest man in history, accumulating capital until the ghost of his father was forced to reckon with the magnitude of his success. October 1929. The mechanism of global capitalism grinds to a halt. The Wall Street crash does not merely reduce portfolio values, it liquidates the social order. In New York, brokers stand on ledges. In the industrial heartlands, production lines fall silent as aggregate demand collapses. The Great Depression is, for 99% of the population, a catastrophe of biblical proportions. For J. Paul Getty, it is the clearance sale of the century. While the Dow Jones Industrial Average begins its agonizing descent to 89% of its peak value, Getty is flush with cash, having divested significant holdings just prior to the collapse, a move of prescient timing that borders on insider knowledge. He identifies his target, the Tidewater-associated oil company. This is not a speculative wildcatting operation. It is a fully integrated major with refineries, pipelines, and service stations. It is a corporate leviathan that is bleeding out on the trading floor. Getty observes a mathematical anomaly. Tidewater's stock price has fallen so low that the company is trading for less than the liquidation value of its assets. Effectively, the market is offering to sell him oil refineries for free, provided he buys the inventory. It is the financial equivalent of buying a bank vault for the price of the metal, with the cash still inside. However, the capital required to execute this hostile takeover is locked behind a formidable gatekeeper, his mother, Sarah Getty. Following George's death, Sarah controls the purse strings of the family trust, now valued at roughly $180 million in 2026 currency. Sarah is a woman of Victorian sensibilities, terrified of debt and scandal. She views the stock market with the same suspicion she views gambling dens. Getty must engage in a psychological siege against his own mother. He writes her incessant letters, mixing filial devotion with terrified warnings that the family fortune will evaporate to inflation if left stagnant. He wears her down. Reluctantly, she releases the funds. Getty begins buying. He does not buy in a frenzy. He buys with the slow, suffocating pressure of a python. He utilizes creeping acquisition tactics, buying small blocks of shares to avoid triggering price spikes or regulatory alarms. The Securities and Exchange Commission, established in 1934 to prevent precisely this kind of predation, is still in its infancy. Getty exploits every loophole. He battles the Tidewater Board of Directors for nearly 2 decades. They try to dilute his shares. They try to bar him from meetings. He sues them. He outlasts them. By the time he consolidates control, he has acquired an empire worth billions for pennies on the dollar. Simultaneously, he applies this vulture capitalism to the high art market. The Depression has decimated the European aristocracy. Dukes and earls, land-rich but cash-poor, are selling their heritage to keep their estates heated. Getty circles the auction houses of London and Paris. He has no formal training in art history, but he memorizes the terrifyingly complex provenance of 18th century French furniture and Dutch masters' paintings. He targets the assets of the Russian Romanovs, liquidated by the Soviets, and the collections of British peers ruined by inheritance taxes. He purchases the Ardabil carpet, a 16th century Persian masterpiece, not because it moves him to tears, but because the seller is desperate. He acquires a desk belonging to King Louis XV. He negotiates prices down to the last franc. In his diary, he notes the cost of a Renoir alongside the price of his laundry service. He lives in the grandest hotels in Europe, the George V in Paris, the Excelsior in Rome, but chooses the smallest rooms without a view to save on the daily rate. He calculates that the cost of hotel living, which includes heating, electricity, and service, is lower than the property taxes and maintenance of a private home. This era cements the duality of his existence. On paper, he is becoming a titan, the architect of a vertically integrated supermajor that controls the oil from the ground to the gas tank. In reality, he is a transient ghost, moving between hotel suites, surrounded by crates of priceless art he refuses to unpack, obsessively checking stock tickers. He writes to friends that he feels rootless, yet he systematically cuts every root that tries to take hold. He marries and divorces with clockwork regularity. Adolphine Helmele in 1928, Anne Rourke in 1932, Louise Dudley Lynch in 1938. Each marriage follows the same depreciation schedule. Initial infatuation, followed by the realization that Getty's libido is distinct from his capacity for intimacy, followed by a settlement check. The acquisition of Tidewater is the technical masterstroke of his career. It transforms Getty Oil from a production company into a global energy conglomerate. He now owns the tankers that ship the oil and the pumps that dispense it. He has eliminated the middleman. But as the 1930s bleed into the war years, the victory is hollow. He has conquered the market, but he is alone in his hotel room, calculating the adjusted cost basis of his happiness. He learned to profit from the misery of the world, a skill that he would soon apply with devastating efficiency to his own bloodline. The geopolitical chessboard has been reset. World War II is over, and the Marshall Plan is rebuilding Europe, creating a voracious appetite for cheap energy. The center of gravity for global oil production is shifting from the American Southwest to the Persian Gulf. However, the Middle East is a closed shop. The Seven Sisters, the cartel comprising giants like Standard Oil of New Jersey, Exxon, Royal Dutch Shell, and Anglo-Iranian Oil, BP, control the region with an iron grip. They have carved up the map of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran. There is no room for an independent operator like J. Paul Getty, except for one anomaly on the map, the neutral zone. This is a barren, uninhabited wedge of desert, approximately 2,000 square miles, sandwiched between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. It is a diplomatic no man's land, created by the Heir Protocol of 1922 because the borders could not be agreed upon. Both nations hold undivided rights to the resources underneath. It is a geological question mark. The Seven Sisters have surveyed it and passed, deeming the rock formations unpromising and the logistics of drilling in a lawless borderland too expensive. Getty sees the rejection by the major companies as an invitation. He approaches King Ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia. The king is in need of revenue. The royal treasury is depleted, and the existing payments from Aramco, the American consortium, are insufficient for his modernization projects. Getty proposes a deal that shatters the established pricing structure of the oil industry. The major companies typically pay a royalty of roughly 22 cents per barrel. Getty offers 55 cents. Furthermore, he offers a staggering upfront cash bonus, $9.5 million. In 2026 terms, this is a risk capital injection of approximately $120 million. It is a suicidal gamble. Getty is paying a premium for the right to drill in a place where no oil has been found, in a terrain that reaches 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, with no roads, no water, and no infrastructure. The industry mocks him. They call it Getty's folly. For the first time, he is not buying a distressed asset. He is betting the solvency of his company on a hole in the ground. The operation begins. The logistics are militaristic. Everything must be shipped in. Drilling mud, steel casing, food and air conditioning units for the trailers. The geology is unforgiving. The drill bits grind through thousands of feet of Eocene limestone and anhydrite. For 4 years, the result is silence. Dry hole after dry hole. The $9.5 million is gone. The operational costs are burning a hole in Getty's ledger at a rate of millions per year. His executives plead with him to cut his losses and retreat to California. Getty, managing the operation via telegram from his suite at the Ritz in Paris, refuses. He studies the seismic data himself. He is convinced the Bergen Trend, the massive oil field in neighboring Kuwait, extends into the neutral zone, February 1953. The crew is drilling at a site known as Wafra. The bit reaches a depth of 3,500 feet, punching into the first sand of the Bergen Formation. The vibration on the rig floor changes. The mud circulation pumps begin to strain. Then, the roar. Oil does not just seep, it explodes. The Wafra field is not a puddle. It is a reservoir containing reserves estimated at 16 billion barrels. The chemistry of the oil is sour, high in sulfur content, making it harder to refine, but the sheer volume renders the quality irrelevant. Getty has struck an asset that will produce revenue for the next half-century. The economics of his life change overnight. He is no longer just a wealthy American businessman. He is a sovereign wealth fund in human form. His personal net worth vaults past the Rockefellers and the Fords. He has outmaneuvered the Seven Sisters, the British Empire, and the U.S. State Department. The victory at Wafra is the catalyst for the golden age of capitalism, fueling the post-war boom with cheap gasoline. But for Getty, it confirms a dangerous hypothesis, that he is smarter than the collective wisdom of the world. He ignored the experts. He ignored the geologists. He ignored the accountants. And he won. This reinforces a God complex that will make him impossible to reason with in his personal life. He has conquered the desert, extracting liquid billions from the sand. But as the oil flows, he retreats further into his isolation. He has proved he needs no partners, only subordinates. He conquered the desert, but the true solitude was just beginning to settle in. J. Paul Getty, now 66 years old, requires a headquarters that matches his new geopolitical weight. He does not choose a penthouse in Manhattan or a villa in the south of France. He chooses a fortress in the gloom of the English countryside, Sutton Place. Located in Surrey, 30 miles southwest of London, the estate is a Grade 1 listed Tudor manor built in 1525 by a courtier of King Henry VIII. It is an architectural behemoth of red brick and terracotta, comprising 72 rooms, 14 bathrooms, and sprawling over 700 acres of deer park and manicured gardens. He purchases the property from the Duke of Sutherland for a mere $60,000, approximately $2 million in 2026 currency. It is a distressed sale, symptomatic of the post-war collapse of the British landed gentry, who are being liquidated by inheritance taxes and the soaring costs of maintenance. Getty acquires it for the price of the land alone. The history comes free. He moves in, not as a resident, but as a curator. He fills the long gallery with his collection. The Lansdowne Heracles, a Roman marble statue from the 2nd century, paintings by Rembrandt and Raphael, and the Ardable carpet, which he instructs servants to walk around, never upon. The house becomes a vault. He installs high-intensity security lighting and a pack of Alsatian dogs that patrol the perimeter, fed on premium cuts of meat that cost more than the wages of the estate staff. Despite the opulence, the day-to-day operation of Sutton Place is governed by a pathological parsimony. The heating is kept at a minimum to save on fuel oil, forcing guests to wear coats indoors during the damp English winters. The most infamous artifact of this era is installed in the main hall, a standard British GPO payphone box with a coin slot. Getty had observed that contractors and guests were using the house phones for long-distance calls to New York and Paris, inflating his bill. His solution is a brutal piece of user interface design. He installs a lock on the rotary dials of the regular phones and directs everyone, including visiting billionaires and aristocracy, to the coin box. To make a call, they must feed it sixpences and shillings. It is not merely about the money. It is a psychological power move. A reminder that in Getty's world, communication is a commodity that must be paid for up front. His personal life is organized with the same transactional coldness. He lives with a rotating cast of female companions, often referred to in the press as his harem. These are not random encounters. They are aristocratic women like Rosabella Birch and Robina Lund, often widowed or divorced, who sign complex legal agreements to reside at Sutton Place. They compete for his attention in a grim tournament of affection. In exchange for room and board, they provide companionship and validation. Getty, obsessed with his own longevity and virility, begins experimenting with HGH, human growth hormone, and procaine treatments, convinced he can reverse the aging process. He dyes his hair a violent, unnatural shade of reddish-brown and undergoes facelifts that leave his skin taut and waxy. He is constructing a facade of vitality to match the immortality of his statues. But the air at Sutton Place remains stagnant, smelling of floor wax, old money, and the quiet desperation of people waiting for a man to die. He built a fortress to protect his money, unaware that he had locked himself inside with his own demons. October 1957. The turning point of his public existence arrives not with a business deal, but with a magazine article. Fortune magazine publishes its first ever list of the wealthiest Americans. The editors, led by journalist Stuart Alsop, have done deep forensic work on the hidden assets of the nation's elite. The public expects the list to be topped by a Rockefeller, a Ford, or a Mellon, names that are synonymous with American industry. Instead, the #1 spot is occupied by a man most people have never heard of, J. Paul Getty. The magazine estimates his fortune between $700 million and $1 billion. In 2026 purchasing power, factoring in the appreciation of assets, this dominance equates to a net worth exceeding $100 billion, largely liquid or tied to voting shares. He controls absolutely. The revelation hits the culture like a shockwave. Overnight, Getty is stripped of his anonymity. He is branded the richest man in the world. The reaction from the public is immediate and invasive. The Postal Service begins delivering sacks of mail to Sutton Place by the truckload, up to 3,000 letters a day. They are not fan mail. They are begging letters. People write to him asking for money to pay off mortgages, to buy cars, to fund inventions, or simply because they feel entitled to a sliver of his surplus. Getty reads them. He reads them with a morbid fascination that hardens into misanthropy. He calculates that if he gave every writer $10, he would be bankrupt in a year. He categorizes the human race into two groups, those who have money and the parasites who want it. To manage this new fame, Getty constructs a carefully curated social mask. He pivots into the role of a business guru. He hires ghostwriters to pen articles for Playboy and eventually a best-selling book, How to Be Rich. In these texts, he presents himself as a wise, frugal philosopher of capitalism, dispensing aphorisms about hard work and the millionaire mentality. He creates a mythology of the self-made man that conveniently omits the initial capital from his father and the ruthlessness of his takeovers. He becomes a cultural icon, the grandfather of the hustle culture, telling the working class that wealth is a mindset, not a structural advantage. However, this public avatar is a lie. While he preaches success to the world, his private life is a debris field of failed relationships. He has 5 ex-wives, and he speaks of them with the detached annoyance of a man discussing bad investments. He views marriage as a contract that inevitably breaches. His relationship with his children is managed through memos and lawyers. He refuses to attend their weddings or graduations, citing work commitments, yet spends hours negotiating the price of a tapestry. The sons, George, Ronald, Paul Jr., and Gordon, are kept on a financial drip feed, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to be independent. They are employees in the business of being a Getty, subject to performance reviews. The world sees a Midas. His family sees a Minotaur, consuming his own young to sustain his vitality. The world now knew exactly what he was worth, and that specific number painted a target on the back of every person who carried the surname Getty. October 1973. The Yom Kippur War erupts in the Sinai Peninsula. In retaliation for Western support of Israel, the Arab members of OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, unleash a weapon more potent than any ballistic missile: the oil embargo. Within weeks, the posted price of a barrel of Arabian Light crude quadruples, jumping from roughly $3 to nearly $12. This is the first oil shock. For the global economy, it is a cardiac arrest. The era of cheap energy, the engine of post-war prosperity, is terminated. Inflation in the United States spikes to 12%. The stock market loses 45% of its value in a slow, grinding crash known as stagflation. For J. Paul Getty, however, the crisis of 1973 is the greatest liquidity event in the history of capitalism. The asset he spent 40 years accumulating, oil reserves in the ground, instantly appreciates by 400%. His wealth decouples from the reality of the industrial world. While airlines go bankrupt and the British government implements a 3-day week to conserve electricity, Getty's income accelerates to a rate that defies comprehension. By 1974, his personal income is estimated at $6 million per month, roughly $45 million per month in 2026 currency. The mechanics of this wealth transfer are stark. Every time an American motorist waits in a 3-hour line to fill a gas tank, a fraction of that transaction flows upward, through the complex piping of the Seven Sisters, eventually settling in the accounts of the Getty Oil Company. He is one of the few individuals on the planet who effectively owns a private central bank of energy. Yet sequestered in Sutton Place, Getty offers no empathy. He issues statements criticizing the profligacy of Western governments, blaming the crisis on welfare spending and a lack of discipline. He installs telex machines in his study to monitor the spot price of crude in Rotterdam, watching the numbers climb with clinical satisfaction. The juxtaposition is jarring. Outside his gates, the social fabric is tearing. In the UK, uncollected garbage piles up in Leicester Square due to strikes. In the US, truckers blockade highways. Inside Sutton Place, the environment is hermetically sealed. Getty continues to negotiate prices for silver services and worries about the cost of heating the manor, even as he earns enough every hour to buy a small town. He is completely insulated from the consequences of the commodity he controls. He has become a stateless entity, a financial island whose GDP exceeds that of the developing nations his oil comes from. This era marks the final fossilization of his worldview. He becomes convinced that money is the only stable element in a chaotic universe. He trusts the barrel more than the bank, and the bank more than the government. As the world burns for want of oil, Getty warms his hands over the fire, unaware that this excessive accumulation of capital is attracting a different kind of predator, one that does not care about stock prices, but about the flesh and blood value of a grandfather's love. He had all the money in the world, but no amount of liquidity could purchase what was about to be surgically removed from his lineage. To understand the kidnapping, one must first autopsy the family history that preceded it. The rot in the Getty dynasty did not begin in Rome in 1973. It began in a hospital room in New York in 1958. Timmy Getty, J. Paul's youngest son by his fifth wife, Teddy Lynch, is diagnosed with a brain tumor. He is 12 years old. The treatment involves radiation and multiple surgeries that leave the child blind and scarred. Across the Atlantic, Getty is in the midst of the crucial negotiations for the neutral zone rights and the securing of the Wafra field. He claims his business presence in Europe is critical to the family's future solvency. For months, as Timmy slowly dies, he calls for his father. Getty refuses to travel. He has a pathological fear of illness and death, viewing them as contagious failures of the will. He sends letters. He sends checks to cover the medical bills. But he does not send himself. When Timmy dies on August 17, 1958, Getty does not attend the funeral. He remains in Europe, citing urgent business. This absence destroys his marriage to Teddy Lynch and sends a chilling signal to his surviving sons. In the Getty calculus, a barrel of oil outweighs a coffin. Fast forward to 1971. The counterculture has seduced the next generation. John Paul Getty Jr., the third son, has moved to Rome and then Marrakesh. He marries Talitha Pohl, a Dutch actress and style icon who embodies everything J. Paul Getty despises: bohemianism, drug use, and spending without producing. The couple becomes the center of the hippie-rich set, living in a haze of opium and heroin. To the patriarch at Sutton Place, this is not just a lifestyle choice. It is a breach of contract. He views his son as a weak vessel, corrupted by the very money he provided. On July 11, 1971, the inevitable chemical conclusion arrives. Talitha Getty is found dead in their Rome apartment, dead from a massive heroin overdose. She is 30 years old. John Paul Jr. is shattered. He retreats into a shell of addiction and grief, becoming a recluse in London. The children, including the future kidnap victim Paul III, are left to drift in this wreckage. They are heirs to a billion-dollar name, but are raised in an environment of emotional anarchy. Getty's reaction to Talitha's death is one of judgment, not comfort. He interprets the tragedy as proof of his son's incompetence. He cuts off access to the family trust for Paul Jr.'s branch, enforcing a rigid financial discipline that leaves the grandchildren exposed. Paul III, the golden hippie, is living in Rome without security, without guidance, and ironically without much actual cash, despite the myth of his last name. The grandfather has fortified his money against the market, but he has left his biological assets completely unguarded. The negligence had created a generation of heirs who were soft targets, roaming the streets of violent cities with a price tag on their heads that they could not pay, but which the world believed their grandfather could. November 1973. The stalemate has lasted 4 months. The kidnappers, a cell of the 'Ndrangheta operating out of the Aspromonte Mountains in Calabria, are losing patience. They are rural bandits used to quick payouts, not high-stakes corporate standoffs. They decide to escalate the negotiation from financial abstract to visceral reality. They take a razor blade to the right side of Paul III's head. The procedure is performed without anesthesia in a cave that smells of sheep manure and mold. They excise the ear, place it in an envelope along with a lock of hair and a note, and mail it to the offices of Il Messaggero, a Roman newspaper. History provides a grotesque intervention. Italy is paralyzed by a postal strike. The package containing the decaying biological proof of the boy's peril sits in a sorting facility for 3 weeks. By the time it arrives at the newspaper on November 10th, the flesh is necrotic, black, and barely recognizable. The forensic pathology report confirms the DNA. The photos are published. The visual evidence of the mutilation breaks the public's indifference, but it does not break J. Paul Getty's accountant mindset. It merely shifts the parameters of the deal. He now knows the product is damaged, but the asset is still recoverable. The negotiation enters its final, most infamous phase. The kidnappers drop their demand to roughly $3.2 million. Getty counters. He agrees to pay, but the structure of the payment is a masterclass in financial cynicism. He consults his tax advisors at Sutton Place. They inform him that under the United States tax code, the maximum amount an individual can deduct as a theft loss or personal casualty loss is $2.2 million. Any dollar paid over that amount would be real money, subject to taxation. Getty draws a line in the sand. He agrees to send exactly $2.2 million of his own money, the deductible limit. For the remaining $800,000 required to secure the boy's release, he turns to his son, John Paul Getty Jr. But the son is destitute, living in a drug-induced haze in London. Getty offers a solution. He will lend his son the $800,000. However, this is not a gift. It is a secured loan. He has his lawyers draft a promissory note requiring John Paul Jr. to repay the principal plus 4% annual interest. He effectively monetizes his grandson's freedom, turning a rescue mission into an interest-bearing asset on his personal balance sheet. The exchange takes place on a snow-covered overpass in southern Italy. The boy is found at a filling station in Lauria, shivering, malnourished, and mutilated. The police eventually arrest 9 men, including a high-ranking mafia boss, Girolamo Piramali. But the ransom money, the banknotes carefully microfilmed by investigators, mostly vanishes into the Calabrian construction industry, laundering the crime into concrete. Recovering in the police station, Paul III asks to call his grandfather to thank him for saving his life. He dials Sutton Place. J. Paul Getty is informed that his grandson is on the line. He declines to take the call. He fears that acknowledging the boy might imply an emotional liability or worse, set a precedent for the other 14 grandchildren. He hangs up. The transaction is closed. No post-deal customer service is required. It was a victory of accounting over humanity. The boy survived, but the surname Getty was now synonymous with a specific strain of malediction that no amount of compound interest could cure. 1974 through 1976, the end game. J. Paul Getty is 83 years old. The man who once bragged about outliving his enemies is now fighting a losing war of attrition against cellular decay. His obsession with health transforms into a paranoid regimen of Fletcherism, the practice of chewing each mouthful of food 33 times before swallowing, to liquefy it for maximum nutrient absorption and minimum digestive strain. Meals at Sutton Place become agonizingly slow rituals of mastication, performed in silence. He suffers from a litany of ailments: chronic dermatitis, an enlarged prostate, and Parkinson's-like tremors in his hands. To combat the visual evidence of aging, he undergoes a series of cosmetic surgeries that are primitive by modern standards. The skin is pulled too tight. The eyes take on a permanent, startled expression. He looks less like a man and more like a taxidermied version of himself. He stops traveling. The Boeing 747s and luxury liners of the era are too risky, too full of germs and potential kidnappers. Sutton Place evolves from a manor into a mausoleum for the living. He installs heavy steel doors and electrified fences. He sleeps with a weapon. The kidnapping has validated his darkest fear, that he is prey. He surrounds himself with a Praetorian guard of former SAS officers and those omnipresent Alsatian dogs whose barking echoes through the halls at night. He spends his evenings in the projection room, watching black and white prints of pre-war cinema, preferring the ghosts of the 1930s to the reality of the 1970s. His libido, once the engine of his social life, has been chemically extinguished by age and illness, leaving only his other great lust: art. During this period, he is orchestrating his final and most ambitious project, the construction of the J. Paul Getty Museum in Malibu, California. It is a recreation of the Villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum, a Roman estate buried by Vesuvius. He obsesses over the blueprints, the marble sourcing, and the landscaping. However, there is a cruel irony. He will never see it. He is too frail to fly to California. He builds paradise by remote control, checking photos and invoices, criticizing cost overruns on terrazzo tiles from 6,000 miles away. He prefers the company of his statues to his family. When his children visit, the conversations are stilted and financial. When he looks at the Lansdowne Heracles, he sees perfection, a form that does not ask for loans, does not get addicted to heroin, and does not age. In the final months, he becomes a prisoner of his own fortress. He is the richest man in recorded history, yet he dies in a room with a coin-operated telephone down the hall. His body, pumped full of experimental vitamins and ravaged by the stress of holding up the sky, finally signals capitulation. The paranoia has won. He successfully defended his fortune from the taxman, the kidnappers, and his wives, but he is left with the realization that the only thing he cannot negotiate with is the silence that is coming for him. The death, the only creditor he could not bribe, was finally knocking at the door. June 6, 1976, 12:01 a.m. Sutton Place, Surrey. J. Paul Getty dies in his sleep. The cause is certified as cardiac failure, complicating a frail constitution ravaged by prostate cancer. He is 83 years old. The event is not marked by the weeping of a gathered clan, but by the quiet efficiency of staff notifying lawyers. There is no state funeral. There is no lowering of flags. The reaction in the financial capitals of London and New York is not grief, but a frantic speculation on the disposition of the largest private fortune on the planet. The body is prepared for transport. Even in death, Getty is subjected to the logistics of international shipping. He is placed in a casket and flown from London to Los Angeles, a final transatlantic journey to the villa in Malibu, the Roman fantasy he built but never saw completed. He is interred in a private crypt on the property, sealed away from the public eye alongside the bones of the son he let die, Timmy. Then comes the reading of the will. It is the most anticipated legal document of the decade. The family gathers, expecting the keys to the kingdom. What they receive is a final posthumous lecture on the corrosive nature of unearned wealth. The estate is valued at roughly $4 billion. Adjusted for the asset inflation of 2026, this represents a capital force of approximately $25 billion. To his sons, he leaves crumbs. Ronald receives a paltry sum. Gordon is already named a trustee, but receives limited direct cash. The women of Sutton Place, Lady Ursula Dabo, Rosabella Birch, who spent years tolerating his moods and his frugality, are left with humiliatingly small annuities and shares of stock that amount to a fraction of a % of his net worth. He treats them like retired housekeepers rather than partners. The true beneficiary is an entity that cannot speak, spend, or disappoint him. The J. Paul Getty Trust. He leaves the bulk of his estate, 700 million shares of Getty Oil Company, to the museum. This decision exploits a specific provision in the Tax Reform Act of 1969, allowing him to shelter the fortune from the IRS by designating it for charitable purposes. It is a masterstroke of tax avoidance. Overnight, the Getty Trust becomes the wealthiest art institution in the world, possessing an endowment larger than the reserves of many central banks. The will stipulates that the money is to be used for the diffusion of artistic and general knowledge. It is a vague mandate that effectively disinherits his bloodline in favor of canvas and stone. He ensures that his name will be associated with the high culture of the Renaissance rather than the sordid headlines of tabloids. He grants immortality to his ego, while ensuring his children remain on a leash, forced to petition trustees for their livelihoods. The reading of the will triggers an immediate legal civil war. The forgotten grandchildren and the marginalized sons file suits. They challenge Getty's mental state. They challenge the validity of the trust. It is the beginning of years of litigation that will consume millions in legal fees, money that flows to attorneys rather than heirs. Getty had predicted this. He knew that by starving them of capital, he would turn them against each other. It was his final act of control. He set the board, moved the pieces, and then left the room, leaving them to play a game they could not win. The king was dead, but the war for the spoils was just beginning. The epilogue is a study in divergent paths, the ascent of the stone and the collapse of the flesh. First, the flesh. We return to John Paul Getty III, the boy on the snowy highway. He never truly returns from Calabria. The trauma of the kidnapping, compounded by the cold rejection of his grandfather, unmoors him. He drifts through the late 70s, self-medicating with a lethal cocktail of narcotics. In 1981, 5 years after the patriarch's death, Paul III consumes a mixture of Valium, methadone, and alcohol. The result is a massive stroke that leads to liver failure and quadriplegia. He survives, but he is locked inside his own body. He is left blind, unable to speak clearly, and paralyzed from the neck down. He remains in this state for 30 years, cared for by his mother Gail until his death in 2011. The fortune that could not spare a few million for his ransom eventually spends tens of millions on his round-the-clock medical care. It is a grim accounting error. The preventative maintenance would have been cheap. The repair cost was infinite. The wider family dynasty fractures. In 1984, to resolve the liquidity crisis caused by the trust's ownership, the Getty Oil Company, the source of all the power, is sold to Texaco for $10.1 billion, $130 billion in 2026 currency. The company J. Paul Getty spent his life building is dismantled, chopped up for parts. The family cashes out. They become immensely wealthy individuals, but they lose the engine of their influence. They are no longer oil barons. They are merely rich people. Now, the stone. While the family disintegrates, the trust rises. In 1997, the Getty Center opens in Los Angeles. Designed by architect Richard Meyer, it is a $1.3 billion acropolis, $3.5 billion today, perched on a hill above the Sepulveda Pass. It is constructed from 1.2 million square feet of travertine stone, quarried from Bani di Tivoli, Italy, the same quarry that built the Colosseum and St. Peter's Basilica. The irony is geological. The stone comes from the same soil where the grandson was mutilated. The center is flawless. It is a grid of perfect geometry, white metal and fossilized stone, designed to last for centuries. It houses the art Getty bought for pennies during the Depression. The Van Goghs, the Turners, the French furniture. It is free to the public, a gift of staggering generosity from a man known for his miserliness. Every year, millions of visitors walk through these halls, admiring the taste of a man they think was a philanthropist. They see the beauty. They do not see the cost. The camera moves through the empty galleries at night. The lighting is museum-grade, preserving the pigments. The silence is absolute. There is no shouting, no weeping, no sound of drilling, no ringing of coin-operated telephones. Everything is controlled. Everything is owned. The art is safe. J. Paul Getty achieved his ultimate ambition. He transmuted the dirty, volatile business of oil into the clean, eternal permanence of art. He sanitized his legacy. But if you look closely at the travertine walls, you can see the fossils trapped in the limestone. Small living things that were crushed to build a monument. In the end, J. Paul Getty got exactly what he wanted. He turned his life into something cold, beautiful, valuable, and untouchable. He became a statue in his own museum while his flesh and blood turned to dust.